you guys with. Oh, thanks, Greg. I don't mind getting interrupted. If I'm saying something and it's confusing or you need to know in the moment, just either raise your hand or just interrupt me. It doesn't mess up my flow. Or save your questions for the end. I love questions of any kind, even if they're challenging me, I welcome that. So, and I really do mean that. I'm gonna give you about 35, maybe 40 minutes I've just got so many things that I do and that Greg wanted me to share with you and different organizations I'm part of. Um, so yeah, let me just get started. Okay, so just so you know, I'm a visual artist and a community arts curator, which means I really work with communities of color, mainly on social justice issues. And what I'm going to share with you today is how I moved from evolving just personal aesthetics, just things that and I encourage you to do this too, things that you're attracted to looking at or that make you happy or excited or that's your intuition speaking. So how I moved from those kind of things into creating a space around me that is focused on community, social justice, spirituality, and healing with AWA, which is Asian American Women Artists Association, and also a place of her own. So this is the best part, and I have to learn how to blow my own horn, but I just got 2 grants for 2023 and 2024. One is the California Arts Council Legacy Artist, and there were only 9 of us chosen, at least for Northern California, and that's through this, for some reason, Youth Speaks is administering it, but we all tend to be older artists. And the second grant is through Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, Creative Core Grant, and these are both unprecedented grants. They've never been given before, but the California Creative Core YBCA grant helps me. I'm doing a project with Korean Community Center East Bay's mental health clinicians to teach them how to use art to encourage dialogue and to encourage deep diving into mental health issues. And just one thing I wanted to not be remiss on is to say that my art studio's in San Francisco on Ramaytush Ohlone land, and that I actually live in Marin on Coast Miwok land. And if any of you are interested in social justice in the arts of any kind, this is a free organization, U.S. Department of Arts and Culture.us, has nothing to do with the government. It's run by artists, it's all free. And they're the ones that gave me this information that I can put on my every talk I give. And I'll give all this to Greg if you don't keep track of it. So just welcome to my studio. This is my art studio in the city that I haven't seen for a while because I've had a concussion, but I'm getting better. And eventually I hope maybe you guys can visit me. I do open studios there twice a year, and there's about 100 artists in my building. So I've been an artist professionally for 40 years, which means I've made money from my art. And for 65 years, I've lived and had healing experiences as a Chinese American female. And I do identify as a San Francisco artist. I paint, I use found objects, I do art installations, and I've been a street artist. I've done street fairs, but I also have a piece in the Smithsonian in the Washington, D.C. now, which I'm very proud of. And I'll tell you about that. And then I'm a community arts instigator, curator, which means anytime I put together a show with multiple artists, I try to throw in questions. I try to give information so people, a lot of times lately, I've been going into more white communities and installing kind of new thought processes about communities of color. And these are the labels that my work tends to get if I'm written about in the press. And this is how I talk about myself: cultural and ethnic surrealism, which means what I paint doesn't normally exist in reality; social justice and feminist art, which is furthering the needle for women's rights; and then spiritual community health and wellness, and that's helping to heal our communities that are so crushed all over the world, actually. So a little twist in this, just being honest, I've had 30 years of incredible depression, history of domestic violence, and a culturally instilled silence of being Chinese, but I think Asian across the board has a lot of enforced silence across different countries, not even just here. And in 2016, though, I just had this awakening, and I was able to get off of 20 years of antidepressants and sleeping pills and anti-anxiety meds. And that's when I started developing A Place of Her Own, which is a healing program for women. So that being said, how do I start? How to use cultural heritage as an art medium? It's really looking back at your history and understanding where you come from. So this is a photo of Visitation Valley looking down at the San Bruno Mountains in San Francisco. And when I grew up here, it was a very working class neighborhood and totally multi-ethnic. If you look at this, is my kindergarten class. I mean, there's every color on the map here, but I grew up running in and out of these kids' houses. And I grew up knowing that people were different, but not because of their color or their ethnicity. It was just their personalities. And the reason I'm telling you that is because that informs the women that I work with now, which is multi-ethnic. These are my parents. They've both passed. And this is their happier side. They had really horrible childhoods, but they're very resilient. My dad became a sculptor after he retired, but he never was willing to say he's an artist. And then my mom, I don't know if you could see this over here. This is a necklace, but it's made with McDonald's coffee stir sticks, like old fashioned ones. But that's the kind of stuff my mom would save and then turn into art. I grew up speaking Spanish, not Chinese, because my father didn't want us to have an accent because he was so discriminated against growing up. And I'm third generation San Franciscan. And these are my brothers. We're all 5 years apart, much older now. And we still get along, still kind of quiet. My older brother hardly says anything, and that's from family trauma. But it's not because we don't like each other. We're just learning how to talk to each other. So back to the found objects. I get excited when car windows get broken. And back in the day, I used to live in Hunters Point, and I used to collect bus shelter glass. Every other week it would get broken, and I would be on the curb in the morning sweeping up the glass. And I love making chandeliers, jewelry, and artwork out of this kind of stuff. I used to do jewelry for haute couture shows in the city. Like I made stuff with broken beer bottle glass, and I sanded it so no one got hurt. But I love working with weird objects. Like these are old spark plugs, and this is beach glass. And then I do larger art installations. So this is in San Francisco, Chinatown. The San Francisco Arts Commission gathered some artists that work with found objects quite a few years ago. And it was when there were a lot of vacant buildings in the city and a lot of vandalism. And this particular restaurant that I was in was pretty famous back in the old days. All the movie stars used to go here, but it was empty and the owner needed to retrofit it, but the building just kept getting vandalized and graffitied over. So once they installed me, and I just put up this I called it the Chinatown Memory Shop. Nobody graffitied on the window anymore. And I almost wish I had this store. It was a faux store, but it gave me, I got to play with my mom because she grew up in Chinatown. So I got to install memories that she had about Chinatown as a child. So what else? Inspiration. What are my aesthetics? Since I started my art career 40 years ago, I've always loved anything Parisian, Paris, French, haute couture. I don't know why, but I don't question it. I just do it, and I bring it into my work, colors and textures and flourishes, I guess you could say. This is a house I used to have in San Francisco. And even I got inspiration from the curtains one day, and this is the painting I ended up making from the curtains. So anything's inspiration wherever you are. And my friends have learned to send me, or they post in social media pictures like this is in Puerto Rico because he thought it looked like one of my dresses. So it's what I painted from it. I love wedding dresses, but not because they represent weddings, but because of the sculpture of it. I just love them. And this was probably the first painting I ever did. So I just went right for the dresses, and I still paint images that feel like this. That's more contemporary. And there's usually a story, like this is about escape or refuge and play. So I also started using, I don't know what this was at the time, I didn't know. And I had a .com job. I was used to be a pharmaceutical rep, but I used to drive 1.5 to 2 hours to work each way and work for 12 hours for .com. So if you do the math, I was hardly ever home. So I started painting these paintings with wide, expansive spaces because I could. This is called Gardening at Night. And then this painting, there's a little trailer on the right. It's called 120/80, which is normal blood pressure. So this, I think this was my way of soothing the contraction I felt from doing this job. I didn't stay in it very long. I couldn't stand the amount of hours were crazy. So then I also had an art studio in Hunters Point Shipyard, and I was really lucky that I had Joe Sam as a mentor. And he's actually, I think it's the final weeks of his show at MOAD right now, the Museum of the African Diaspora. But he told me to look at my ethnicity and gender and infuse that into my work, because that's what he did, to make it sing. So I started looking at these things through self-archaeology, looking at my generational family patterns, cultural heritage, really start looking at it. And so you're going to hear me say the meanings of my paintings, because I realized later that they all predicted what I was going to be doing. So right around the time he was telling me this, I started painting this. Had no idea what she was crawling on for months. I didn't know what to paint there. It was just blank space. And I sit with coffee in a rocking chair, and things just kind of pop into my head. And this was, it said to paint rice. And then um, when the title comes up, that's when I really get what the painting's about. It bubbles up in my head. And this was research series number 3, Anthropologic Dig. And that told me to start looking at my roots. Because until then, I was raised in a city where you didn't have to really find out what was Asian about you or anything. You just hung out with everybody. But this told me to look at my roots. Now, this painting is an original, like originally it was a painting of my grandmother. I'm not sure why I did it, but I was really angry at her at this time. This is way back when, because she treated my mom, I thought, harsh. My mom kept having tuberculosis relapses when she was little, when she was a young teen. So she had to get sent away to tuberculosis sanitarium to rest and in Redwood City. But whenever she came home, my grandmother put her to work. But I didn't realize it was because she was the oldest of 7 and they needed money. So at the same time that I painted this, I started to wonder why I had such low self-esteem. This was in my very early 30s. And I would choose abusive relationships just regularly. And I talked to my mom about it because my mother and father never fought. I wasn't repeating their pattern. And we decided that her brothers and sisters we knew they were all with abusive partners or dominant partners or addicted or alcoholic partners. But my mom married a calm man. And I attribute it to her being sent away to the tuberculosis sanitarium, because I don't know why else she would have been different than her 7 brothers and sisters. So anyway, we started to look at my grandmother's story. My mom didn't know that much about her mother, because her mother didn't say that much. But what we went to the National Archives, which is a space right by the San Francisco airport, and you can look up the papers of anybody that has come in through the West Coast, immigrated in, and the Chinese in particular were singled out and let's say incarcerated there, and they were interrogated there, and some of them got sent back, got rejected, sent back to China. Some killed themselves because they couldn't take the rejection, because their families were depending on them. And then some did land in the US. So my grandfather went to China and bought my grandmother And this was news to my mom, but we found it through the interrogation papers. And he also went and bought this little boy who he was going to sell here. And he gave him to my grandmother and said, pretend he's your kid. So the problem was she got caught. So the interrogation papers actually says, note Ham Shimak hesitated when asked her child's name. So that threw her into a different category, and she ended up staying on the island for 3 months in the barracks with this child she didn't know. So this was her mugshot, and I just started learning these stories about her, and then I decided to paint this mugshot of her. I don't know, like to give something back to her or to thank her, because she died when I was 13 and we never spoke. She didn't speak English and I didn't speak Chinese. I had 24 cousins, but she never spoke to me and I never spoke to her. So when I painted this, though, I cried the entire time that I painted. And I think that's when I knew there was some kind of connection with my grandmother while I was doing this. I was releasing something for her. So that is, I'm saying this to you so that you might be curious about family members you don't know that much about. Become curious about them and their lives. Even if somebody's angry at them, maybe just become curious about them, why they were the way they were, because this made me compassionate. And compassion is the foundation for healing anything. So I started doing art installations thanks to Dia de los Muertos. If you're ever interested in amazing art installations, every year they do the most amazing art installations there. And Renee Yanez has since passed away, but they allow multicultural people to get involved with the Dia de los Muertos there. And we do life-size installations. And this was how I started doing large-scale installations and telling her story. And then I started, I don't know why, I don't intellectualize this. This is just coming, it's just ideas, which is intuition. But I got inspired by all the dress shops in Chinatown. So I decided I wish that my grandmother had a dress shop so they wouldn't have been so poor. They were so poor in Chinatown. This is before welfare or anything like that happened. So that was my wish for her. And what you see here is my mother, and these are the barracks. They actually recreated them. So actually, if you go to Angel Island Immigration Station, you could see what these women might have felt like. You had a bunk with all these women you didn't know, maybe hundreds of them, and that's your only place, and that's where your property is, and hope nobody takes your stuff. But my mom, we took my mom there, and she read a letter of forgiveness for her mother. So something inside me had me print these images on fabric, and I don't know why I started turning them into pillows. I cannot remember, but I hand stitched all of these, and there was something healing in the hand stitching, kind of nurturing. Like this is my father, a pillow for my father back here. And when I was stitching this, I thought this was his Christmas card from like first grade. But when I read this, it was the Chinese boys Christian home in Oakland, which was an orphanage. So I'm like, what's my father doing in an orphanage? But this lady went to China and bought him and brought him over. And I've since found out that they used to lock him out at night. My brother told me, my father never told me, but they used to lock him out at night as a little boy out of the house in Oakland. I don't know why, but the guys that raised him were, they used to call them hobos. They're the guys in the train yard across the road. They used to teach him how to stay warm and how to eat out of a can without burning his fingers. I just found this out like a year ago. So I made pillows for my parents, and my mom was also sold for my grandfather used to trade her for his opium when she was 6 to about 12, because he died when she was 12. And that's how she got tuberculosis too, was from him. But she would be the trade for his opium. And yeah. So I've been healing through that because I still feel it from her. She's passed. So these pillows, it's been on both coasts. I put up shows that are flexible depending on the space. This was at Gallery Route 1 in Point Reyes, who I love. They gave me their back gallery and they said, do and say whatever you want to say. And that was pretty amazing considering it's a very white area. But they wanted me to tell the story of the human traffic in my family. So I hung the pillows so people would walk into them if they weren't paying attention. And it brought a lot of tears and a lot of people asking a lot of questions because I wanted to talk about human trafficking, which is still an epidemic here in the Bay Area. Nobody knows about it. So when I do these kind of shows, I also have an area on the wall for people to get involved somehow, whether it's a thought process or like in this case, I had them they could cut these hang tags, these umbrellas, and each hang tag said, donate to Asian Women's Shelter or learn about human trafficking through the Polaris Project. And this is before people really got the hang of hashtags. This is before Instagram, which is such a shame because it would have been a beautiful project for that. But I say this for Asian Women's Shelter in San Francisco because they actually go to the jails and help get these the people that have been trafficked. They help get them out of jail, get them legal support, find places for them to live. And in a lot of cases, there's not a common language that these people speak. And it's not just Asians, they'll do it for anybody. So again, back to my paintings telling me what I need to do and what I need to do for other people, other women. And this painting became clear to me when the name Pull came up. And it told me to stop being a doormat. And then it also told me over time, or it reminds me that women need healing. I mean, everybody needs healing, but women of color in particular need help to heal because we'll never gain equity. They'll never take advantage of their human rights if they don't believe they deserve it. So that's me finding my purpose. This is over, a couple decades here. But the main thing is I have to keep working to heal and clear myself so that I can help women and community from a very clean, healthy space. Okay, so everybody take a breath, just a collective breath. So this is a painting that's up at Berkeley Art Center right now. Unfortunately, they didn't take the whole triptych, they just took the middle. But this is a painting that came out of my wish that feminine energies, women, it could be a woman, a man, it doesn't matter, but anyone with feminine energies learn to work together, learn that we're each other's allies instead of enemies, not instead of competing, worrying about being better than somebody else. And this kind of came from years of me wondering, this is the Emperor's Tomb in China. I used to wonder why the women weren't represented, or I wanted to represent the women. I wish I could afford a space like this. I would do all their mothers or their sisters or their aunties or their sisters. Yeah. But I just settled for a drawing because I can't do anything that big. And this whole idea I pitched to Chinese Historical Society because I wanted to create a project so people that have ever felt unseen or unheard or silenced, I wanted them to collectively come and I would collect their stories and their images and create a huge installation so that the people that really needed to be seen and heard, whether they're living or past, could find a place there to do that. But the director there at the time, and this is indicative of at least the Chinese culture, she said, "Oh, that's just your stuff. I don't think anybody thinks that way anymore." That's just how she talked to me. She said, "My daughters have no problems being outspoken." And I just, for a minute, I went and I stopped. And so she kind of silenced me for a minute. But then I went on the internet and wrote Feminism in China. And this book came up. And it's really, I couldn't even read it. It was too hard hitting. But this Feminist Five are these 5 young women who were trying to protest groping in public transit. And they got arrested and majorly humiliated. And some of them were kept a little too long in Chinese prison, constantly interrogated by men and stripped of their clothes. And the only way they got out was Hillary Clinton got hold of it. This was during the International Women's Summit. So she got them released. But if you read this and you read the articles, women had to escape to New York um, to raise money to help the sisters on the inside that are um, suspected of being feminists in China. So I was right. But so what I ended up doing with this is pursuing the sketch. This is still a small sketch. And while I was doing this, I'm really pleased that the Smithsonian contacted me. I didn't even know they knew who I was, but they had a curated show called What is Feminist Art? And it's a collection that was started in the 70s with, I don't know if you guys have ever heard Judy Chicago. She's probably one of the most famous feminist artists. But they added us to the 70s collection. So I'm permanently have a piece in there, which I'm really thrilled about. So the painting's not there, the sketch is there, and the pitch of the idea is there. But right now this is at Berkeley Art Center through April 20th. So spirituality and healing, how does that get incorporated into art? So as I was running a place of her own, I had to keep working on anything that triggered me and use that as a tool to find out what I need to heal in myself. And one of the biggest things was I still felt unworthy. I still felt like I was bothering people. So I kept myself small. And if we keep ourselves small, we can't affect the planet. We can't do things we're here to do. So I actually did a painting, a giant triptych painting in fuchsia, which is kind of scary to me because I thought people would criticize it, but I did it anyway. And then I wrote phrases all over it and showed it again at Gallery Route 1. And I wrote, we mistakenly think we are who others think we are. Boundaries and limitations derived from our genetics, our cultural heritage, and our life experiences are only loving tools and lessons to guide us, not to block us. And you do not need approval from others. You are, and I am. So again, back to the paintings that tell me what to do. This is a painting that still lives on my living room wall. I never sold it. And when I painted it, I start with a Vera Wang wedding dress. And for some reason, I wanted to make it look almost like a rock or marble, something very firm and solid. And I sat with this painting for months. The background dropped in, and then eventually these dress forms were coming out of the back of her. I still didn't know what it meant. But the title at the end is what told me, Launching the Gifts. The painting told me that I'm about to be a solid and know what I bring to the table so that I can leave parts of my gifts behind with communities that need it. And it stays with me today, this painting. And then another thing I do is I do installations again to get people to think. So this one was about hungry ghosts, which is what I call things that bring you chronic heartache, like your family patterns, your beliefs. So I put questions for people to participate in. And yeah, that's again at Somart's Cultural Center. That was for another Dia de los Muertos. So just everybody take a breath for a second and just kind of come into the room with me. If I've lost you, I don't know. So me trying to find out what was Asian about me. I joined Asian American Women Artists Association. And I joined in 1998, which I don't even know if you guys are born then. But I stayed for a long time because it became a fight for equity and healing and empowerment. Because in the museums, largely Asian American women are not represented, and women largely are not represented in museums still in the US. But I stayed for quite a while, and then I ended up becoming the board president, which meant I was also the director because there was only 3 of us running everything. But I learned how to speak. I learned what about me was Asian, and I found some lifelong sisters in the organization. And even men join us too. Like right now, our board has Dan Lau just joined to help with fundraising. So we take help wherever we can get it. And then we did these large scale art exhibits that I loved, again, at Arts Cultural Center in San Francisco. And I'd have these very odd titles like Undercurrents in the Quest for Space. And Undercurrents was my way of asking women artists to do to do art around the things that go under the current that people don't notice. So we got some very bold art in this show. So Cheers to Muses. Greg, is this the book you guys are using? Yeah. So this book has been around a long time, but it's still the only book like this that asked us to name an Asian American woman, past or present, non-familial, that influences us. And I had not thought about that till this book. So it was really great that I not only thought about it, but we put it in the book. And my hero still to this day is Maya Lin. And I don't know if you guys know who she is, but she's the one that created the Vietnam Memorial, which is really controversial back in the day. She was only 19 years old and she wanted to make a scar in the earth. And Congress went after her because they wanted to put giant, like, soldiers, bronze soldiers on top of it. And she stood her ground, which for a little 19-year-old Asian woman who's Chinese woman whose parents were school teachers, she stood up to these guys and they were calling her communist. And back then you could still get arrested for being a communist. It was really frightening. And she's amazing, but she made sure every person that passed in the Vietnam War is on the wall and they could be visited and you could see your reflection in these people's names. It was a brilliant idea. And she's still making civil rights, amazing civil rights art installations across the country. She did a Lewis and Clark expedition that went from, oh God, I think it's like Ohio out to the Pacific Ocean, but she didn't mention them. She just talked about all the Indians that were killed along the way once they were discovered. And she put their names back. She tore down parking lots. Like she got permission to tear up the parking lots and reinstate the natural habitat. And then she installed respectful ways to put their names back where they've been decimated. She's brilliant. It's Maya Lin. So this book is the only book I think that is focused on West Coast Asian American women artists by Laura Fantone. And Greg actually introduced me to her. She took Greg's class way back, I don't know, back in 2012 or before that even. And then she followed me around for a year and then wrote this book that just came out, I think 2 years ago or something. So then I was the board president for way too long and curated and directed, mostly pro bono. I wasn't getting paid because we were a new nonprofit. I had to raise the money, but I got really sick and burnt out. And my question to you guys up and coming is, how do we help leaders, including yourselves, do the work we need to do and not burn out? So that's just the thought. I got no answer for that one. In the meantime, while I was running AWOL, one of the things I decided, since I'm working for free, I gonna do things I cared about. So I started a place of our own. Just the idea, it was an artist residency. This beautiful woman here, Renee Baldacchi, who's still a dear friend, just said, here's the residency space, do what you want. So I invited 9 Asian American women and I said, make something that answers the question, if you had a place of your own, what would it be? But what ended up happening is most of them needed to talk about their childhood trauma or childhood abuse to be able to talk about what they want for their lives now. And it inspired a place of our own for me. So now we still have that same phrase all these years later, but a place of our own's been workshops, lectures, discussions. And what I'm trying to do right now is write a workbook and a book so that anybody can engage in these ideas and processes. So when the Exploring the Hungry Ghost, if you remember, Hungry Ghost refers to your things that bring you chronic heartache. Chances are it's beliefs that hold you back, fed by your multi-generational family patterns. And that's proven, there's a thing called epigenetics where it's proven that this stuff gets inherited through your DNA, but you can break it. So exploring our hungry ghosts, I go through beliefs that hold you back and family patterns. Then we work at releasing these hungry ghosts, which is possible. And this is a thing called love letters to myself. I'll show you. And then I actually we work to help you create art pieces out of found objects, just like those women at the DeYoung did, and then actually do a full-on exhibition. So again, this is my art studio. This is pre-pandemic class. Everything else has been on Zoom since then. And we have Latina, Asian, African American, Indigenous, and white. So this is one of the beliefs that hold you back. One of the ways we do that is have people create these rocks with their beliefs that hold them back on there, like burden. And then I have you carry it with you for a week. And Isabel just happened to be going to Yosemite that evening. So she had to carry it on her body for a week. And then you come back and talk about it. Then we look at your family patterns. And this is created by Frances Cachapero, which is very kind of her to let me use it. But it's like depression, silencing, violence, alcoholism, death, passive aggressive, passive, victim. I mean, you name it, she's put it on here. And then we have you map it onto a family tree. And everybody does a different kind of family tree. It doesn't have to be the standard one. And most of us don't know things past our grandparents, and that's good enough. It's okay. And then you show it or you share it with somebody else. And what happens is you begin to realize that the things that are upsetting you all the time may not be yours. It might be something that happened to your parents or to your great-grandparents. And it starts to take away the emotional ooze out of it. And again, it brings in compassion for those other members in your family that aren't doing it as well. And then forgiveness and then healing. Now, what I was talking about epigenetics, that things get passed down through your DNA, the good news is you can change your DNA. They've proven it. And one of the tenets is by Gabor Mate. He says, trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside you as a result of something that happened to you or didn't happen that should have. Like if you didn't get enough love or acknowledgement or support, like mine was just silent. I always thought my family didn't want me at all. And I'm still healing through that, but I think I figured that out about 10 years ago, that my parents actually did love me. They just couldn't show it. So then we moved to releasing the chronic heartache, the DNA, your hungry ghost. And I call it reparenting yourself, where you become your own parent if you don't have ones that can help you. And we have you rewrite the stories. So this, sometimes people think this is a hokey little project. It's called Love Letters to Myself. But every time I do this, people have the hardest time writing kind things to themselves. So what I have women do is create a gift in a collage for themselves, and then they have to write something that they wish an elder had said to them, or that they as adults can write to their little self. And not your inner self, not your inner child, but your actual little self as you were. So she had little tabs in here of things she wished her mother would have said to her, and it helped her to feel better. Then moving on to the art exhibition. Again, this is SOMART. It's a massive place. I love doing shows here. But this is where we have that work that if you had a place of your own, what would it be? My favorite artist is Manon Wada. She's amazing. She did two here. So this was for her hungry ghost. And then this was for releasing the hungry ghost. So on the left, thirsty ghost is her talking about the alcoholism in her family and the family heirloom chair sinking in the quicksand. So it's putting your finger on what the traumas are or what the patterns are in your family. So her father was an alcoholic, like a heavy alcoholic. But then on the same token, she created this amazing piece, and it's called The Lining Elevations. And she took, again, heirloom chairs from her family, because she's half Czechoslovakian, and she put them on stilts. And the story is, it's kind of like Thai houses that are on stilts to avoid the floods. So this was meant to avoid the flooding of the alcoholism. So it's kind of willing a better life for your family through creating art. And Grace Wang, she realized when she was doing her family patterns that her family's history book only contained the stories of the men. She didn't know that. So she decided for a place of her own, she was going to create a book based on the matriarchy. And we helped her figure out how to install it for the show. But she had to go find pictures and stories that weren't hers because she didn't have any. Nobody saved them. But she just made up her own because why not? Why not rewrite your story? Because the chances are the stories that are in your head aren't necessarily reality anyway. So why not create ones that serve you? So we're going to take a breath for a second. Maybe move a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit more. Just we're almost done. So recently I've had physical issues. I haven't been able to really leave my home for 3.5 years. I was dizzy and I don't, nobody knows what it is, but it's going away. But I had to stop working because I work too much, I think is part of it. So I've stayed home and healed a lot. And the fun thing or the new thing, instead of cursing what I used to do, I'm embracing what I can do now. And I never painted abstracts really before. And this couple, for some reason, decided they wanted to pay me to do an abstract for their new house. And I just said, okay. But I painted this largely without looking, not completely not looking, but I would do stuff. I would move my brush around and then step back and see what I got. And I really like what happened. And I think that's what happens when you open up to change. And then these two are about 4 feet, a little bit higher than 4 feet tall each. But these are also ones I've started working on recently. So I'm at the end of my talk, and I just wanted to say that there's going to be a show at Joyce Gordon Gallery in Oakland, and it opens May 3rd. And I've got about 6 pieces in that. And my friend Susan Almazal just turned 78, and it's going to be her first show she's curating. And there's like all these nudes of her. She's been taking nude shots of her, and they look amazing. But that's an artist stepping into a new space of power, even at 78, or not even at 70. I mean, she's amazing. And then again, this other piece, the centerpiece, is at Berkeley Art Center. I don't know where that is exactly. I was there recently, but it's not too far from where you guys are. So those two things are ways to see me. And what I would like to toss into the air for you guys is, are you ancestral family pattern shifters? And so if you've ever upset someone in your family, if you're the oddball in the family, or you could be in a group and only things occur to you, you're not weird. Or if you've ever felt weird, that just means you're one of the pattern shifters. You just have to find us, and then you'll find out that you belong and that we're just more conscious and more aware than a lot of people. So this is me. I have a talk similar to this that I did for the DeYoung Museum. So that's on their website. This is how you find me. This is how you find a place of our own. And a place of our own doesn't have a lot of offerings right now. I'm trying to work on the book, but we do have the show in August. And what I can do is email Greg all these links that I've been telling you about and dates, so that you can at least find us if you're interested. And then AWA is awa.net. So that's me in a nutshell. You know, it's funny, I forgot to turn on my timer. I'm like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, yet again. Yeah.
Thank you. It would mean so much to hear from you guys. And I would say, when you do that, you're breaking the pattern of silence that you may have grown up with. And if you want to do well in life, you got to break that. So this is a good place to do it. So if you have any questions at all, just, I know what it's like to be shy because I've backed off too, but it would really help me to hear from you guys if you want. I don't want to force anybody. If you're willing to turn your camera on, I would love that too. But it's
Question from Samuel.
yes.
Hi, Cynthia.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah, of course, of course. Thank you. First of all, amazing presentation. Really, really interesting, and I appreciated it. And I just had one question, and it was that if you have any advice for young artists of color, specifically younger Asian American artists who want to break into larger gallery, exhibition, and museum spaces, just because of how difficult that can be. Yeah.
Well, there's a couple organizations I'm going to tell you about, and I don't know if someone wants to write it down and I could type it, or we could send it to Greg and he could send it out to you guys. It's not easy. And then you have to decide, are you commercial? Or if you're going to do social justice, that's not necessarily commercial, but there's grants then that you can go after for that. So one of the things just to get your name out there is Kearney Street Workshop, and then APIC, Asian Pacific Islander Cultural Center, both in San Francisco, both been around for 40 years now, and they've got it down. APIC they're just now doing, it's United States of Asian America or something like that. There's going to be shows all over the Bay Area. But if you go to APIC's website, they'll have a list of all that. So you could see what people are doing already. And the bigger one is it's called DAN, DAAN, and that's Diasporic Asian Art Network. And that's worldwide. And that's based out of New York University, API. And that's full of curators, actually. What you want to do is start getting your work seen in front of curators. I would volunteer places, but don't kill yourself. And I started just putting on my own shows because my work, now it's more acceptable, but back when I was doing it, people didn't understand it. And I just started making my own shows, like Some Arts Cultural Center, you can apply there to get a curatorial fellowship. So they give you money, assistance, and this massive space. It's probably the biggest space in the Bay Area. And you start collecting your friends and people that you know or artists that you want to work with that aren't drama queens. But yeah, the biggest thing is if you want to do commercial, then you got to find your own way on that. I gave up on galleries a while ago because I got screwed so many times because they don't have to pay you and you can't make them pay you. You could take them to small claims court, but they still don't have to pay you. So I'm a little cynical on that. I always did open studios in San Francisco. I would do it and the places I was in would do spring open studios. So the major open studios is in the fall, and then I would do mine in the spring. I just happen to have a great studio, but you could do it anywhere, and they help you find spaces, even storefronts. But that San Francisco Open Studios has been stable and steady for a long time. They do cost about $250 or something, but you get in print in their catalog online. They have all kinds of opportunities. They have a huge show where they have one piece of art from everybody, and doing open studios, there's usually about 400 artists doing it, if not more. Open studios in my building is about to go April 14th, 15th. And you can walk in there and see what other artists are doing. Mostly my building's full of commercial artists. And commercial artists means you make work to sell, not necessarily making an art statement. And Samuel, am I throwing too much at you?
No, no, this is all very, very helpful. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
But there is a huge difference between commercial and social engagement or social practice, but you can mesh the two. I mean, I have meshed the two. I used to sell my art out but I only did it open studios because then you also don't have to give the gallery 50 to 60%. They usually keep that much, which is understandable, but I used to just sell my own work. Yeah.
Cynthia,
For
can you
sure.
talk
Thank you.
about the concept
Are you welcome?
of open studios? Because
Oh,
They operate from city to city, like Berkeley has its own open studio season.
Yeah. So open studios started way back in San Francisco by artists who got tired of trying to navigate the gallery system because there were so few galleries and so many artists. So they started really grassroots. You got to go in people's homes. We used to put out a little tiny catalog so you could see people's names. Yeah, so people come to you. You have to build your mailing list. You have to do your own promotion, but you're part of a bigger event for the day. It's almost too big now. It's over, I think, 4 or 5 weekends now. It used to be one weekend, but it's brilliant. And it's a brilliant way for people to see your work the way you want and the work that you want to show. But it's happening all over the world now. God, in 2019, I was in Paris and I was lucky enough that there was an open studios right where I was staying. And I had a friend that knew what it was. And we got to go into people's houses. It's so brilliant. But that started in the late 70s, I think.
So you don't really need a gallery. You just need an address for people to show up.
Yeah, exactly. Just a space. And I know the San Francisco Open Studios helps you find spaces. They create group spaces. We have one guy, we're not happy about it, but he rents a giant truck and he sits outside our building. So he uses all our mailing lists and all our effort, and then he just opens his truck up. So, but you got to give it to him for ingenuity. It says,